research on varied topics, but what is central to all of my research is that it focuses on understanding causes and contributors to disparities, specifically looking at why certain groups, mainly marginalized groups, minoritized groups, tend to have more aggressive disease, and also tend to have higher rates of mortality. And really the goal is to figure out how multiple different factors, intersect and interact to lead to these disparities. So the topic that I'm presenting today is actually just one aspect of that I'm interested in. And I chose this topic for the class because I figured that some of you might be interested. And maybe you've heard of this topic, maybe you haven't. Hopefully we can have an interactive discussion. So yeah, I'm gonna present to you today some research where we've been focusing on exploring personal care products as environmental risk factors for breast cancer. That seems kind of, I don't know, unique or different, but I'll tell you that it's a really important issue that's understudied. So in my time with you today, I'll present to you just an overall summary of the global burden and the US burden of breast cancer and highlight some of the racial inequities that we see persisting. And then I'll walk you through this idea of environmental risk factors. Well, actually, this idea of, were you not seeing my screen before? I want to make sure you were seeing the slides.
You can see it.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't tell which screen you're seeing. I have multiple screens. So do you just see the PowerPoint or are you seeing my notes?
It's the PowerPoint.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna focus on endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs, as hypothesized environmental risk factors for breast cancer. And I'll share with you some findings from a few studies that I've either published or nearing publication. And then I want to end with a brief discussion on FDA regulation of personal care products and cosmetics, because I think that is one of the key issues that has been raised in terms of the potential for these products to be what we call an example of environmental injustice. And we can talk a little bit about this. And that environmental injustice, just keep that in the back of your mind, because that is in many different ways a contributor to disparities. But this is just one aspect of it. And if we have time, I do have some discussion questions that we can talk about at the end. So in this map, you can see the estimated age standardized incidence rates for breast cancer as of 2018. So this map comes from the Global CAN project, which is basically a site where you can go to and look at cancer incidence and mortality rates, prevalence rates, all sorts of things on a global scale. You can even look at each individual country and learn different things about their cancer surveillance statistics. So in this map, you can see that there are countries that have very light colored blue shading, and then there are countries that have very dark shades of blue. And that shows the variation in the incidence of breast cancer globally. So globally, breast cancer is among the leading new cancers diagnosed in women annually. with 2.1 million new cases diagnosed each year. So that represents about 11.2% of cancers diagnosed each year across the globe. Breast cancer also accounts for 627,000 deaths annually, globally, right? So that accounts for about 7% of all cancer deaths. So clearly it's a major public health issue. And in some places, those countries that are dark blue, so North America, the US, Canada, certain parts of South America, certain parts of Western Europe and Australia and Oceania, those are the countries that have among the highest incidence rates. Now, in the US, breast cancer is the most frequently diagnosed cancer among women, and it has the second highest cancer mortality rate, second to lung cancer. So in the US, in this year, about a little over 280,000 new breast cancer cases will be diagnosed among women. And those cancer cases will end up with, or end up in approximately 44,000 deaths. So again, globally, it's an issue, and it's also an issue in the US. So in this graph on the left, I want to show you that there are differences, what we call disparities in incidence and mortality of breast cancer by race ethnicity. So breast cancer incidence rates are the highest among non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Black women. So we see the rates are about 128 cases per 100,000 individuals among whites, and among Blacks, it's about 124 cases per 100,000. So the incidence rates really don't differ that much between Blacks and whites. And we see among Black and white women, their incidence rates are substantially higher than incidence rates among American Indians and Alaska Natives, among Hispanic women, and among Asian Pacific Islanders. So those groups tend to have lower incidence rates than non-Hispanic Black and white. But what we do see is that when you look at the blue bars, you see the 21.9. So that is the mortality rate. So 21.9 deaths per 100,000 among non-Hispanic white women, but 31 deaths per 100,000 among Black women. And then you see the death rates among Asian Pacific Islanders, Hispanic, and American Indian and Alaska Natives are much lower. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is understanding, why do Black women tend to have such high, significantly higher breast cancer mortality rates. In fact, you can't really visualize this on this slide, but breast cancer mortality rates are at least 40% higher among non-Hispanic Black women compared to non-Hispanic white women. And overall, Black women have the highest mortality rates. Some of the reasons that there are differences in mortality rates has to do with variation in the distribution of some of the more aggressive tumor subtypes. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but I'll just mention that there are approximately 4 clinically relevant subtypes of breast cancer, and they vary substantially with regard to their population overall, or their prevalence overall, as well as their prevalence within each of the racial and ethnic subgroups. So I want you to look at the third group of bars where it says TNBC. So these are triple negative breast cancers, and this tumor subtype is called triple negative because it doesn't express the estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor, or the human epidermal growth factor receptor 2. So 3 really important markers on breast tumors that relate to the potential for optimal treatment. And I'm sure you're aware that having optimal treatment will impact the likelihood of survival, right? So when we look at the triple negative subtype, we see that the prevalence or the proportion of triple negatives among Black women is 22%. When we look at the other racial and ethnic subgroups, the proportion ranges from 10 to 12%. So that is one contributor to the disparity that we see in breast cancer mortality. And you can look at the other bars and you can see that there is wide variation. So in this graph, this is another way to show the variation or the disparities that exist. And these are data from the US for breast cancer cases diagnosed between 2009 and 2015. And what these bars are representing are the proportions of the cases diagnosed that survive 5 years. So the first bars, this first group of bars represent breast cancer cases that are diagnosed early in localized stage. So the earlier you have, the earlier a tumor is diagnosed, the more likely it is amenable to treatment, right? So again, we talked about the fact that having a specific subtype relates to treatment, and it also relates to mortality, right? But also when a tumor is diagnosed definitely relates to survival. So localized diagnosis, so early stage, you can see that 5-year survival is very high, more than 90% across all groups, right? Regional stage, these are a little later, a little more advanced, and you can see how the survival drops a bit, right? And you can see that, this dark pink bar represents non-Hispanic white women. And then the lighter pink represents non-Hispanic Black women. So again, when we look at the racial ethnic groups, so the light gray represents American Indian, Alaska Natives, the black bar represents Hispanic, and the medium gray represents Asian Pacific Islanders. So again, we see this variation in 5-year survival for regional stage. Look what happens when we go to distant stage. So these are more advanced diagnoses. So what happens is women diagnosed with distant stage indicates that their tumors have already metastasized from the local site and now tumor cells are found in other parts of the body, including the brain, it could be the lung, it could be spinal cord, it's now metastasized. So you can see how drastically that 5-year survival drops again. But again, look how much lower this light pink bar is. So Black women at every stage, no matter when they're diagnosed, tend to have lower survival, higher mortality. So this unstaged group, it just means that the tumors were not classified in terms of their stage at diagnosis. So we don't need to focus too much on that. So I mentioned the disparities related to mortality, and I mentioned the disparities related to tumor features, specifically tumor subtypes. But overall, there are 4 major breast cancer inequities. I like the term inequities because it implies that there is something that is not equal across these groups, whereas disparities really suggest that there are differences. And I don't think differences give us a good sense of the issue. So these 4 major inequities between Black and white women in the US in terms of breast cancer are that Black women tend to have earlier age at onset. They tend to have more advanced stage of disease at diagnosis. They tend to have more aggressive tumor features, and they tend to have worse survival. So here's a question for you. Hopefully you can have some participation. What do you think might be some explanations or contributors to these inequities? We talked about a few of them: treatment, subtype, the time of diagnosis. What other ideas do you have that you think might be contributing to these inequities? Someone wanna just volunteer?
You can
Um,
turn on your microphones.
I'd say genetics.
Yeah, I think genetics could be one. Any other ideas? Just shout them out.
Finance.
Finance, sure, absolutely. So I think some of the things you were talking about earlier related to healthcare, healthcare access, insurance, so all of these things definitely contribute. Anyone else?
We're talking about like the inequalities between diagnosis of breast cancer between Black and white women, right?
So yeah, what do you think are some explanations for the
Well,
inequities that I've presented?
I've kind of been focusing on this a little bit, but some people have demonstrated that there's definitely a different reaction to like the presence of like, say, a Black woman in an emergency room and a white woman. So it could be that they don't believe that they're actually experiencing symptoms. Like I know even like with like mammogram screenings and all, like maybe they're less likely to show any signs of anything because they're less likely to go get one because they're told that they don't need one, while white women are like encouraged to get one actively.
Yeah, I think these are all really important points. So I will mention that the causes of these disparities remain largely unknown, but all of the things that you said contribute. They clearly are complex and the causes clearly involve numerous factors that work together. So it's not just one thing causing all of these four disparities, right? I mean, structural racism, we could say, causes all of these disparities, but the distal factors that relate to structural and systematic racism are some of the things that you mentioned: communications with physicians, you know, interactions with the healthcare system, mistrust, access to healthcare, you know, a number of things. So genetics, social determinants of health, healthcare access, reproductive factors, all of those things don't fully explain the disparities, but they contribute. And I don't want to focus on those things. I want to focus a little bit on this sort of unique and emerging area of research that I'm participating in. And this relates to environmental exposures to estrogens or chemicals that mimic estrogens. So that's an emerging hypothesis about one potential environmental exposure that contributes to disparities, particularly earlier age at onset, and potentially more aggressive tumor features. So what are endocrine disrupting chemicals? Endocrine disrupting chemicals are mixtures of chemicals that interfere with the way the body's hormones work, right? They can interfere with normal functioning of the endocrine system, and they can act directly on hormone receptors as mimics or antagonists. So remember I mentioned the estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor. These are characteristics of tumors that either are expressed or not expressed. And that is a key piece of understanding the potential for endocrine disrupting chemicals to impact tumor cells. So the dose and timing of exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals is important. And interestingly, you know, we're exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals even before our birth. So products that our mom used when she was pregnant with us affect our exposures, right? So we're exposed to EDCs in utero, we're exposed to EDCs in the prenatal period, during puberty, throughout puberty. Women are exposed during pregnancy, postpartum, and during the menopausal transition. And the timing of these exposures will have a different impact on breast cancer risk. So endocrine disrupting chemical exposure in children has been linked to early puberty, and early puberty is associated with increased risk of breast cancer. So data from animal studies suggest that exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals from personal care products, particularly hair products. And I'm going to focus on hair products for a lot of the talk because that's one area that I've been studying quite a bit. So animal studies suggest that these exposures are etiologic factors for several human cancers, including breast cancer. But epidemiologic data on this association has been equivocal and has largely focused on white women. So understanding the relationship of these exposures in Black women is important and currently lacking, right? And that's important because Black women tend to use certain products more frequently. Chemical relaxers, for instance, the use of chemical relaxers and straightening products tend to be very high in Black women in the US. Some studies report use as high as 94%. In Ghana, similar proportions of use exist, ranging from 90 to 93%. And in Kenya, where I actually have ongoing collaborations on this topic, approximately 60% of women in Kenya have reported use of chemical relaxers, and about 41% of them use these products long-term. So why are endocrine disrupting chemicals potentially associated with breast cancer? Well, this table tells you, right? So estrogens, that's one group of endocrine disrupting chemicals that are used in hair products to promote hair growth. And these chemicals lead to epigenetic changes. So these are changes in our genome that doesn't cause a change in the DNA sequence, but it causes changes to the expression of certain genes at certain times, right? So it's not a change in the genetic variation, but it's a change in epigenetic. So phthalates is another group, and typically it's used in hair products for fragrance. So when you put something on your hair, you want it to smell good, right? Phthalates are known to alter mammary gland development through epigenetic changes. They're also able to promote cell growth and increase migratory and invasive properties in breast cancer cells. And parabens are used as preservatives. They can increase the growth of breast epithelial cells. So this table just summarizes sort of the concept that endocrine disrupting chemicals can be one source of exposure to environmental agents, and environmental meaning they're external to us and not genetic, that could contribute to breast cancer risk. So in the next few slides, I'm gonna share with you some published work from my colleagues and I in the Women's Circle of Health study. So the focus of this study was to examine the prevalence and patterns of hair product use among women enrolled in this study. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the study in a second. And then we assessed the associations of hair product use with breast cancer risk. And then as we published sort of this first paper that really just looked at the relationship between hair product use and breast cancer risk, we wanted to start looking at the associations of the use of these products with more aggressive tumor features. So the Women's Circle of Health study was a breast cancer case control study in New York City and 10 counties in New Jersey. And in the first set of analyses that I'll share with you, we included about 4,200 women that were enrolled in the study through 2014. So the study was, this is actually an ongoing study. At this point, we're following all of the Black breast cancer survivors forward in time to see what their survival outcomes will be. So we collect data in person. We visit, I'm saying we, but I'm not actually the person going. We have a very large staff of research assistants that assist with this study. And the RAs go into the women's homes. They conduct interviews with them in person. They also collect anthropometric and body composition measurements. And we get permission from these women to allow us to access their medical records and pathology records so that we can get really in-depth information about their tumors. As far as hair product use, we collected information on hair dyes, chemical relaxers, and cholesterol and placenta-containing conditioners, and those were assessed through questionnaires. We used a variety of data analysis methods, including logistic regression models, to really assess the associations of interest, and we controlled for important confounders that are also associated with breast cancer. So on this slide, I just want to show you how we ask the questions. So a lot of epidemiologic research involves asking participants about their exposures, right? So that's one way to collect exposures. Another way is to use biomonitoring, collect blood samples to measure the chemicals or other exposures that we're interested in. For this study, we didn't use biomonitoring to assess endocrine disrupting chemicals. So we're using the reported use of hair dyes, relaxers, and other products as a proxy for endocrine disrupting chemical exposure. In this table, I just wanted to share with you the overall sociodemographic characteristics of the participants. So the first two columns show the cases and controls among Black women, and then the second two columns are the cases and controls among white women. So generally, women were around 50 to 52 years of age. There was a variety of socioeconomic status in terms of education, income, things like that. And a few other exposures. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I want to show you this. So there were significant differences in the prevalence of use of hair products. So the first two bars show hair dye use. The light pink bar are Black women, and the turquoise bar are white women. So we can see that the prevalence of use of hair dyes in the population it's much higher among white women, right? So it's about 30% among Black women, 60% among white women. Look at the difference in relaxer use. Almost 90% of Black women use relaxers, and about 5% of white women use relaxers. So I was actually surprised that there were even 5% of the population of white women that use relaxers. But talking with participants, I've actually learned that many white women use relaxers because they also have thick hair and they want it straight. Deep conditioners that contain placenta and cholesterol differ substantially, but I won't share any of the results regarding deep conditioners because that was a little bit trickier to assess. But overall, we do see a suggestion that Black women tend to use these products at substantially higher rates than white women. So here we're seeing disparities, right? Just disparities in use of these products and potentially disparities in the exposure that we're interested in. In this slide, I'm showing you the first set of associations, and these focus on the associations between hair dye use and breast cancer risk, and it's by race. I just want to point you to two key findings. The first was that compared to non-use, use of dark shades of hair dye were associated with 51% increased risk of breast cancer among Black women. But we don't see this relationship among white women. So using dark shades of hair dye was not associated with increased risk among white women as it was among Black women. So the type of application of hair dye, we found that women that reported using or having hair dye applied to their hair at hair salons had 26% increased risk compared to non-use of the product. Again, this is among Black women. We don't see the association among white women. In this table, I'm showing the associations between chemical relaxers and breast cancer risk. So interestingly, we don't see much of an association between relaxer use in Black women with risk of breast cancer. But among white women, we see that there is an association between use and that home kits are associated with increased risk. And the history of using both hair dyes and relaxers also is associated with increased risk. So in this slide, we try to look at some of the differences in the relationship based on estrogen receptor expression and triple negative subtype. And what we found was that the relationship for increased risk of breast cancer associated with dark shades of hair dye was even stronger among women with estrogen receptor positive disease. And again, salon application of hair dye was associated with increased risk. And here, sorry, I should have clarified. This table shows these relationships by estrogen receptor status and triple negative subtype among Black women only. And then the next table shows the associations between hair dyes and breast cancer risk by estrogen receptor status and triple negative subtype among white women. So there is consistency with the relationship for dark shades of hair dye in Black and white women. So overall, we concluded that use of dark shades of hair dye is associated with increased breast cancer risk. So these are the key findings. Dark shades of hair dye was associated with 51% increased overall risk of breast cancer and 72% increased risk of estrogen receptor positive disease, specifically among Black women. Use of relaxers was not associated with breast cancer risk among Black women, but use of those products were associated with 74% increased risk overall among white women. So this study was published in 2017 and it garnered a lot of media attention. And that's because a few decades ago in the 70s and 80s, the link between hair dyes and breast cancer risk was widely studied, but it was widely studied among white women. So this study was one of the first, if not the first, to basically show that there are associations between the use of these products and breast cancer in Black women. And then in 2019, another study replicated our results. The sister study in an even larger sample found similar findings that we found in the Women's Circle of Health study. And actually earlier this year, the Nurses Health Study, which is a predominantly white sample of nurses in the Boston, well, actually it's a more national study, but a much larger study. I wanna say, our study was about 4,000, sister study was about 50,000, the Nurses Health Study was about 90,000. They also found some evidence that suggests that there is some relationship between hair dye use and breast cancer. So this published work in 2017 from our group really highlighted the fact that we probably need to start looking at hair products as an important risk factor in breast cancer. I'll also add that I have colleagues from other institutions in other states that have been looking at hair products as important risk factors for other health conditions, including some of the inequities that we see in maternal and child health outcomes. So one thing that I'll mention is we really need to identify what the potentially harmful compounds are in these products and what role they're playing in disease risk. Another thing is it's really critical for consumers to have awareness about the potential of the risks that are associated with the use of these products. So I'm actually going to skip over some of the details about this next study. And this is a study that we're currently working to publish. So all of the analysis is done. We looked at the relationship between characteristics of hair product use with more aggressive tumor features, right? In the same study, Women's Circle of Health study, I'm gonna just skip forward and tell you what we found. We found that, remember, in our first study, just overall use of chemical relaxers was not associated with breast cancer risk, right? But what we find is that longer duration of relaxer use, so use of relaxers for more than 10 years, and use of relaxers starting at age 12 or younger was associated with more aggressive disease. So longer duration of use and earlier use was associated with increased odds of poorly differentiated tumors. So poorly differentiated means it's higher grade and looks less and less like normal cells, right? We also found that joint use of hair dyes and relaxers was associated with increased odds of ER-negative disease. Another interesting thing that we found is that the combination of salon and home kit application of hair dyes and relaxers were associated with increased odds of larger tumors and higher grade tumors. We really looked at these associations among Black women and they were consistent, but we didn't see the same associations among white women. So once we publish this study, it will be the very first study to report on the associations between hair dye and relaxer use with more aggressive breast tumor features. So this will add to the literature on factors that potentially contribute to these inequities we see in more aggressive disease that I identified very early in the lecture, right? Black women tend to have more aggressive phenotypes when they're diagnosed with breast cancer. So from this, we generated new hypotheses that we're going to continue to study in other samples to see if what we're seeing is replicated. So this idea about combination application where women are using both salon application and home kit application of hair dyes and relaxers might correlate with a greater exposure of these products, greater exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals over shorter periods of time, right? So future research is needed to clarify these findings, and we really need to get better, more granular methods for assessing these environmental exposures. And all of these types of research questions and studies will potentially lead to our ability to address gaps in knowledge about some of the environmental explanations for breast cancer disparities. So I want to share some of the ongoing work that we're doing. And this was actually a project that some of you may have seen in your emails. So this is a study that was funded by our Center for Environmental Exposures and Disease, our SEED Center at the Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences Institute. And we developed a survey that was sent out to the Rutgers community. So it included Rutgers faculty, staff, undergraduate students, and graduate students. Basically, and this was the flyer. You may have seen this all over campus. So do you ever wonder about chemicals in your personal care products? Have you guys ever wondered about this? Use your reactions. I just want to know if this was something that anyone had ever thought of. No? All right. Well, maybe you should think about it now, right? So I want to give you the overview of this study. So in this new study, the goal is to examine the prevalence of use of a variety of personal care products. So not just hair products, but a variety of products in a diverse sample, and to assess perceptions about use. So I have a check mark here because that part of the study is already done. I'll share with you our preliminary findings. And this study is done in collaboration with the Environmental Working Group. So EWG is a nonprofit company that specializes in research and advocacy in the areas of agriculture, subsidies, toxic chemicals, drinking water pollutants, and corporate accountability. So this is a group, they've developed the Healthy Living app. So before you purchase consumer products, you can actually go to this app and get information about the safety of it. So we're partnering with EWG so that all of the products that our respondents reported using, we can start linking with the hazard ratings, right? And then we will assess the variation in the PCP use, as well as the hazard ratings and risk perceptions by participant characteristics. So in this Healthy Living app and on their website, scientists at EWG focus on products that are on the market. They focus on the chemicals in those products and they test them and rate them. So low hazard rating is 1, and a high hazard rating is 10. So you can see green is good, yellow, orange is sort of medium, and red is bad. And what we know from some of the reproductive and perinatal literature is that Black women and Hispanic women in the US tend to use products that have a higher endocrine disrupting chemical burden, and they tend to be much more hazardous in terms of their, they contain more toxic chemicals. So that's, you know, building on the Women's Circle of Health hair product study and some of the work that my colleague has done in perinatal and reproductive health, we developed this study. And I'll share with you some of the perceptions and attitudes about personal care products. Again, these are sources of endocrine disrupting chemicals, but they're also sources of toxic chemicals that are carcinogenic, mutagenic, and all that. And these are products that are, these are chemicals that are in our products that are on the shelves that we have access to. So think about that. So we had 656 participants in the study. The mean age was about 37. We even had men in this study. And this is important because men are also exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals, and these exposures also relate to men's health. Similar to breast cancer, prostate cancer also, you know, can be impacted by exposure to estrogens and estrogens that, and chemicals that mimic estrogen. So 10% of our sample was Black, about 60% was white, 20% Asian Pacific Islander, and we had multiracial and other, and we also had less than 1% American Indian and Alaska Natives. 10% were Hispanic. So this is a pretty diverse sample. Here's another question for the class. Do you have any idea how many personal care products you use on a daily basis? Think about this in terms of 6 categories of products: oral care, hair products, beauty products. So this includes makeup and other cosmetics, skincare products, right? Your face wash, face moisturizer, deodorant, lotion, right? Perfumes, colognes, and feminine hygiene products. I think some people have put in the chat, perfume, yep, perfume definitely counts. And so Trey says he uses about 7. Anyone else want to share how many products they think they use? I'll share with you how many products I used at the very start of this whole study, which is drastically different. I will tell you that. Come on, just shout it out. 10, 8, 6. All right, so I will tell you that when I started this study, I was using about 22 products a day. That's actually not unheard of. There are people that use 40 products a day. Just think about people. So I'm just going to use myself in this example. Like, I don't wear a full face of makeup, right? But people that do, they have eyeliner, eyeshadow, you know, brow filler, mascara, blush. I just named 5 products just on their face. That didn't include toothpaste, mouthwash, floss. That didn't include lipstick, face wash, lotion, right? So you see how it adds up really quickly. Yep, hair gel counts. Everything that you use on your hair counts. And hair is a very special topic among Black women, right? Okay, so let me tell you. In our study, we found that on average, people use about 14 products a day. So that's just the average. That means there are some people that use tons more than 14 each day. And then there are some that use much less. So among women, it was about 14 products per day. Among men, it was about 12 products per day. In 2004, when EWG did a similar study, men were only using about 6 products on average. So now we're seeing potentially a generational change in the products and the number of products that men are using, right? So you can see that people are using a lot of products. Interestingly, about 19% of our sample reported making their own products. So I would, if I had to guess that this 19%, in that 19% are individuals that are aware of the potentially harmful exposures that are in these products, right? 14% of our respondents reported that they had allergic reactions to personal care products. 3% reported that they had other health effects from personal care products. And almost 45% of our respondents reported that they have started avoiding the use of some personal care products because of these health effects, right? So I want to just briefly share, I think I'm running out of time. Does this end at noon?
No, it ends at 12:15.
Okay, so
But-
I'll try to hurry up and get through this because I do want to share a little bit about the FDA regulations of these products. So we had 7 perception questions and we rated them on a Likert scale. And basically we wanted to know how people felt about the products that they use and how they felt about these questions that we were asking. So let me just go to it. So here's what we found. So this first pie chart is showing that more than 50% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that the personal care products I use affect my health. The second pie chart is showing that so this is about 2/3 agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that organic, non-toxic, or eco-friendly personal care products have fewer toxic chemicals than regular products. Now this slide, this graph or chart suggests that almost 90% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that consumers should be concerned about the health effects of personal care products. Here, about 50% disagreed or, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So in line with the third question, almost 90% disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement, there is no reason to worry about the health effects from chemicals that might be in personal care products. And here about 50% disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement that overall the benefits of using personal care products outweigh any risks from exposure to toxic chemicals that might be in these products. And this next one shows that, so in terms of the statement, organic, natural, non-toxic, or eco-friendly personal care products are just as effective as regular products. 38% responded that they neither agreed nor disagreed. 44% agreed and 18% disagreed. So this last statement here is one that was really interesting. And I have a master's student in health system and policy who's really looking more at FDA regulations about these products. So the statement is that the FDA and other government agencies do a good job of regulating personal care products to ensure that they are safe from consumers. Only 21% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. 34% neither agreed nor disagreed, and 46% disagreed or strongly disagreed. What do you guys think? Does the FDA do they do a good job of regulating these products? Yes, no, maybe, you don't care, you don't know?
Maybe only because they do regulate it, but they take their time.
Okay, I will I will tell you what we found so far. So there are two FDA regulations. So these are federal regulations specific to personal care products and cosmetics. It's the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FD&C Act, and the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. I want to highlight something. So I collaborate with investigators at the City of Hope Cancer Center and in California. And one of the things that they've developed is the Bench to Community like organization. And I present my research there, and they have these conversations. They actually have a conversation tomorrow evening. If anyone wants to join, I can share the registration information with Dr. McMillan. But I want to highlight this. This is from Janet Noodleman. She's a director of program and policy at the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. And she's the director she's the director of the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. So there is a huge movement that's ongoing right now. You may have heard about it, the clean beauty movement, because we need access to clean products. And clean meaning free of toxic chemicals, right? Not only do we need access to clean products, we need access to clean and affordable products, because right now, these clean products are expensive. They come at a premium, so some populations will not have access. It's environmental injustice. That's a topic for another time. So this statement from Janet Noodleman is that there is only 2.5 pages of federal law that exists to regulate a $100 billion cosmetic industry and a $70 billion fragrance industry. And that law has only been amended once since it was enacted 80 years ago. So you can imagine the disconnect between the law that exists and the problem the law needs to be addressing. This is a disparities issue. So, and then in the last few slides, I just want to highlight some of the key points of these two acts. So the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines cosmetics by their intended use. So articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, or sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. Those are cosmetics. Those are the things that the act will regulate. And I'm putting regulate in quotes. Soap doesn't fall into this. So that's a separate thing. So the FDA's legal authority over cosmetics is different from their legal authority over drugs, biologics, and medical devices. Under the law, cosmetic products and ingredients do not need pre-market approval. So are they being regulated? The only thing that needs pre-market approval are color additives. So these are the things in hair dyes. Manufacturers of cosmetics have a legal responsibility to ensure the safety of their products. But here's the key thing. Neither the law nor FDA regulations require specific tests to demonstrate the safety of individual products or ingredients. The law also does not require companies to share their safety data with FDA. So again, are these products being regulated? Sort of. So companies and individuals who manufacture or market cosmetics have a legal responsibility to ensure the safety of their products. Again, do you see how the wording of this federal regulation is putting it on the manufacturers and not on the FDA? Neither the law nor FDA require specific tests to demonstrate the safety. I want to keep highlighting that. So now that was the FD&C Act. This one is the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. And I will tell you that labeling is very important. And that is one of the key things that the Environmental Working Group, our partners in this personal care product research, is really advocating about, right? So the fairness in what's listed on the ingredients list. If you don't know what's in your product, how do you know that it's safe? So basically, this act is about label statements that are required under the authority of the FDA. And basically, it just says that labels must appear on the outside of any product. So the container, the wrapper, inserts, whatever. There must be a way for consumers to know what's in the product. So cosmetics produced or distributed for retail sale to consumers for their personal care are required to bear an ingredient declaration. So cosmetics not customarily distributed for retail are exempt from this. So products that are used in salons don't have to have labels. Do you remember in the results I showed you that there was a suggestion that products used in salon or women reporting having their hair dyed in salons had higher risk? It's possible that products sold to salons, because they're exempt from exempt from this requirement, potentially they're more harmful. We don't really know. We need to test the products. Ingredient declaration must be conspicuous so that it's likely to be read at the time of purchase. Do any of you read your labels before you purchase products? And even if you did, would you understand everything that's on the label, right? So that is something that I'm working in collaboration with investigators at Columbia University on this topic. So when you look at tobacco products, right? Cigarettes have these labels and they have these big warning labels and all that. Our cosmetic products don't, right? Cosmetics have toxic chemicals in them. I don't know if it's the same level of warning that needs to be on these products, but it's something to consider. And the last thing I'll just say is that labeling is important because labeling is important, but the label has to be truthful, right? So if a product says it has this, this, and this in it, then we should be able to feel safe and secure that those are the chemicals in it. So this slide just highlights all the folks that I've worked with on this project, including tons of students. And I think we're out of time, but I really wanted you to think about these 3 critical thinking questions. I can send this to you, Dr. McMillan, if you would like. But I'm curious about what issues come to your mind when you think about the possibility that hair products and other personal care products might represent potentially harmful exposures that increase the risk of cancer and other conditions. And especially think of this in the context of the 4 disparities that I presented to you, right? And maybe not even the 4. Let's focus on 2 of them. Black women are diagnosed with the breast cancer at earlier age, and they tend to have more aggressive disease, right? So I talked about the fact that we're exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals even before we're born, right? And early exposures to endocrine disrupting chemicals has been linked to early puberty. Early puberty is a risk factor for breast cancer. So do you see how we're connecting the dots and potentially finding, a connection between widely used products and risk of disease? What research questions do you think are warranted as next steps to understand some of the associations I presented today? And lastly, what recommendations might you have for additional federal or state level policies to address some of these concerns? Think about those questions. And on my last slide, I just want to thank all of you for your attention. I hope this was interesting. Here's my email address if you want to reach out to me. I'm also on Twitter. On Twitter, I tend to try to share new publications and retweet things. So if you're interested in this research, we're always talking about this stuff. And that's all I have.
I want to thank you. I think there's some questions, some of which you've answered, Go through. Anyone have any questions? Let's see. There was one. Hold on. Let me go through these. Let's see.
Oh, is there a difference between, I see one, between darker shades of hair dye and lighter shades? So yeah, we didn't see any associations for lighter shades of dye. We did see it for dark shades of dye. And anecdotally, I've talked to my own hairstylist, and she said to her, it makes sense that the darker shades of dye would be associated with more risk because dark dyes are depositing color onto your hair, whereas lighter shades tend to be stripping color, right? So while both are basically introducing some chemicals onto your hair that could potentially be absorbed through your skin, having long-term exposure to the dark shades of dye on your hair that stays on your hair to keep it dark could be really associated with increased risk. So another thing is, in the epidemiologic and toxicologic literature, there has been evidence that shows that dark shades of hair dye is also associated with increased bladder cancer risk and increased risk of lymphoma. And one hypothesis was that some of these dark shades of dye contain chemical amines that are more susceptible to contamination. So this is an area that is gaining, it's almost like interest is reemerging in this topic because, like I said, in the US, they were studying the relationship between hair dyes and breast cancer risk specifically in the 70s, right? And they focused on white women, no data for Black women, Hispanic women. So I do think that we're gonna see more studies that look at this in more diverse populations. And, you know, the relationship with chemical relaxers is also something that you're going to start seeing. And there's also a lot of new straightening products that we have no idea what the health impacts are. You know, it's like you stop using one product because it's harmful and then you use the next product, but we don't know how safe it is. So these are questions that will continue to be asked and studied. And I will tell you, the exposure to these products, if you thought that, you know, me saying that I use 22 products is crazy, there are girls, I'm talking children, 10 to 15 that use more products than that, right? So in a very critical window of development, they're using these products. They're exposed to chemicals that could potentially alter their health outcomes in the future. So this is definitely a topic that will be discussed for some time, you know, because as far as like early puberty, we're definitely seeing that Black and Hispanic girls are starting puberty years earlier than other racial and ethnic groups. And that is having an impact on long-term health outcomes. And there's a group of folks, one at George Washington University in DC, that really studies this from the like environmental injustice lens, right? Because we talk about this as like it's beauty products. Who cares? But these are products that people are using every single day, toxic chemicals and all. And I showed you what the FDA does about it. So think about that. Any other questions?
I had one. You mentioned Ghana and Kenya. Do you have any research at this point that shows that the results correlate to what the findings are with Black women in the US?
Not yet, but I'll tell you, right before the pandemic, I went to Ghana. I'm sorry, I went to Kenya So February of 2020, I was invited to the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, to present this research because I met 3 Kenyan investigators at another conference, and they were so interested in this topic that they wanted me to come there, present my research, and we developed a new project. So I think we just now got IRB approval to do the study in Kenya. We applied for 2 grants from the Kenyan government. I'm not sure if they'll be funded. So at this point, we don't have data. But if you think the FDA regulations are bad, the regulations of the products in Kenya are worse. And that was one of the things that we discussed. So the Kenyan study will focus a lot more on not just assessing the prevalence of use of these products in the population, but testing the products that are on the market because they're virtually unregulated. So that is, hopefully I'll have some data to share at some point.
Any other questions? Well, again, I want to thank Dr. Llanos for taking time from her busy schedule to be with us today.
Happy to be here.
And I will make sure that you get her contact information. I don't think she's giving out jobs. So
I don't have any. I wish I did.
But she might be able to help you with internships and things of that nature as well. Okay. So again, thank you so much. If any of you have any questions, just stay on for a few minutes. I know you have some projects. Thank you, lady. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We have a few minutes. Any questions? You received my email and the announcement that your projects are due on Wednesday instead of today. Can I see a nod or something? Okay, good. All right. I was laughing with folks earlier. Students told me, some of you told me I was cruel and inhumane for requiring that assignment the first day you're back from spring break. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I thought about it. So you have until Wednesday at 4 p.m. Just make sure if your team hasn't gotten a time to me, because right now 4 slots have been taken and there are 4 more slots that are open, but it's pretty open, you know, at this point. All righty. Any questions that you have about anything while I have you here before we end?